Welcome, everyone, back to the Level Set. I'm here on set with Larry Fields, Dr. Charles Alexander, and Mike Jones. We want to cover several topics this morning as we try something different. Larry, you laid out a few things that we want to jump into, starting with the January 6th committee. And if you've been following that closely, you know at this point, the evidence that they have presented is both compelling and overwhelming. And one of the things that they have been effectively able to really establish is the knowledge and awareness of all of the actors involved in the attempt to subvert 80 plus million votes, mine included, yours included, overthrow the government and reposition the United States as an authoritarian regime. They knew they were doing wrong, man. If people asked for preemptive pardons immediately afterwards, hey, man, I need a pardon for this crime I just committed on your behalf. We saw Jeffrey Clark, the guy who was wanting to be the acting attorney general that would support and give the imprimatur of legitimacy to the baseless, insane, ignorant-ass allegations that Donald Trump was making about election fraud that have been proven false over and over again. He says, well, I'll be the guy that says that the Department of Justice agrees with you so you can go further with your scheme. I'd like to ask all of you, man, if you've been paying attention to that panel, where you think things are headed. Mike, I think I agree with you. At this point, if you don't at least indict, we're not getting to conviction yet, but if you don't at least indict the majority of the people that have been exposed, then the rule of law is absolutely non-existent in this country. That's just my thought on it. I want to come to you all right
now. Look, I've actually almost thought about going back to writing consistently again because of this situation, because I'm going to put it in broader terms than Trump. And I think you're looking at the beginning of the collapse of a complete society, because fundamentally, when you have people who were in charge of the place attack the very legitimacy of the governmental structure, literally Trump did not attempt to do anything that Jefferson Davis didn't do. Only thing he didn't do was fire on Fort Sumter. But if you think about it, it's the exact same thing. And could thought it is the exact same thing. And I think
Mike, you coming in and out a little bit.
In the 21st century, latter half. Okay, I said, I think you can look at every problem we currently have as a result of not dealing with the treasonous activity of the Confederacy. Set up precedent, and a lot of ways set up the precedent for the next guy taking it over, way bigger than Donald Trump. And I'd like to hear Charles as the social scientist on in office. I think it's something more serious.
We've lost Mike Jones.
Okay.
Hold on.
No, but I agree with his point. If we can go to you, Dr. Alexander, I do agree with his point that when you see institutions such as they are come under direct attack for the people responsible for their sustenance in an effort to serve an ideology that's diametrically opposed to the idea of representative democracy, which is white supremacy and autocracy and authoritarianism, such that we control it all. The rules, we make the rules to fit our agenda. We are the law. There is no other law but us. And so we do what we want to do. We'll take your votes and trash, and we'll take this process and trash it. We'll do this openly with the expectation that no one is going to ever hold us accountable. Yeah, Mike, I think your point was well made, and I was throwing it over to Dr. Alexander because we had lost you for a minute. So either one of you all can jump back into that conversation right there.
I also agree with that position, and I mean, it is very clear that what we see is a continuation of, you know, that same ideology that informed the Confederacy. You know, there's like with the case, and even with the coverage of the case, or I will say specifically with the coverage of the case, to present this information as if somehow or another there's two sides to this story is problematic. And that is where you see how the larger system is complicit while trying to toe the line. You know, and so, you know, it throughout this whole thing, and I also agree that this is beyond Trump, but that's how you get to see again that the media is complicit. So the media will have you believe that all this is about, you know, the ideology of Donald Trump and the power of Donald Trump, the impact of Donald Trump on, you know, on white folks, you know, as opposed to this is white folks, and that's how we see the ascension of Donald Trump. And so what is more likely is that he fit into the perpetuation of this plan that has existed for hundreds of years prior to our public awareness of who he is, right? And so it minimizes the fact that this is who white supremacists are, and this is what white supremacists are doing. There is no two sides to this story. What we saw was a failed coup, and however failed it may have been, it allowed them to generate more intel for the next attack and the next assault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and also, you know, emboldens them to continue to do everything else that they do. Most people don't associate any of this like with the what is Cliven, whatever his name is, the guy in Montana who had a standoff in the national parks, and you know, people aren't necessarily
Cliven Bundy.
Cliven Bundy, you know, and people are all over the place to the degree to which they compare this to the attacks on different state houses and the attempted or the plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. That's who these people are.
Yeah.
You know, Trump just happens to have the largest platform, but these people existed before him, right, and they will continue to exist. And unless there is some type of consequence for, well, actually, kind of regardless of if there is a consequence, because if there is a consequence, you know, due to January 6th, those people will just be considered martyrs, right? And that inflames the next generation. But at least if there is a consequence, you know, that serves as an opportunity to start to recast the information and to, you know, very directly address the disinformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Larry, did you want to weigh in on that?
I think we covered it all. You know, because I think between the four of us, I think Mike had stated before that Trump didn't go and get these folks. These folks went and got Trump.
Yes.
And so the issue, and if you pay attention, Trump has tuned his message in to the pitch that they want to hear, and he continues to do that. And that's all this is. And this was a dry run. Well, it was a semi-dry run. and they're going to continue and going to continue. And they see that the opposition that they're up against is, not even a paper tiger. These folks, I mean, there's just no defense, man. There's no defense to them, and they let alone offenses. So the bottom line is, Mr. Jones, you are correct, and I'm sure that with your knowledge of history, you know the markers of a fallen civilization. And I would imagine if there are 10 markers of a fallen civilization at this point, we're at 6. And that's where we are. And we need to understand that. So the question becomes to us, how do we position ourselves? What do we do when when the veneer of a democracy, and we've known for those that have been prisoners to their own communities, this hasn't been a democracy at all. What you've seen from us is just exceptionalism, and a number of individuals are able to find their way in an oppressive system. So the question becomes, what do we do for the masses of us in this, fallen democracy where they want minority rule? How do we navigate that?
You know what? I think that's our challenge. Du Bois said in 1905, Souls of Black Folks, the question of the 20th century is the question of the color line. He addressed the duality of being Black and American. And we've kind of talked about this before, and my position is we have not ended up on the wrong side of that question. We have chosen to be American as opposed to Black. And because we think of ourselves in the collective now as American, we don't see the train coming either. Okay, as opposed when we had the tension of the duality, you could say, well, okay, this is going to be a problem. And the problem that it is for white folks is different than the problem that it's going to be for us. And when I hear Black pundits talk about our democracy and nobody can connect the dots, well, it was American democracy that made us slaves, that literally everything that happened to us was legal from the standpoint of there was laws to support it, the structure supported, etc. So there's no magic in democracy. It doesn't cure anything. Ultimately, it's about the character and nature of a people in a society and the culture that they produce, no matter what the governance structure happens to be. And there has been always a fundamental lack of empathy and character in America, despite what it says about itself. And this question will come back around to what it has always come around, starting with 1787. And that is, what do white people who know better, what are they prepared to do about white people who won't do better? And they have consistently failed to answer that question successfully, literally since the founding of the country. And I think they'll fail to answer it again. And we always get the bill for that. But I think this time they're going to get the bill too. Okay. When you look around in the places that we don't want to be, them dark places we're not going to want to be, you're going to see a lot of white compatriots in there with you, and they'll be wondering, how could this happen to us? And we are now so ignorant of our history, we'll be wondering, how did it happen to us too? And I would say, from my perspective, we shouldn't be surprised when it happens. And American elites have broken the first rule of power. And the first rule of power is, if you shoot at the king, you better not miss. Okay, because it ain't no coming back from that. Okay, whatever you had, you're not gonna have no more. you're going to be in the gulag, and you got to figure out how to get out. Okay, because don't worry about the due process and all of that. Due process is for people who comply with the system. You violated that, so at that point, all your rights are terminated. And I don't think American white people at the elite level have the capacity to do that to other white people.
And we're about to
I would
find
like
out.
to add something to that.
Yeah.
Going back to Mike Jones' statement about the black politician, I'm not sure to what degree with black politicians that we are witnessing misinformation versus disinformation when they talk about our democracy. I'm not sure. I'm just skeptical what we're getting, from the professed politician, and political pundits when they talk about our democracy. Because I suppose it could be argued that if democracy is the will of the people, then white supremacy is democratic.
Right. It is. Right. It is. It is.
And so, but we don't have people saying that, right? We have people who have a vested interest in white supremacy being a one-off as opposed to a standard of practice.
Right.
A standing operating procedure. And we are vulnerable because it exists, and exponentially more because the folks who are in a position to help us to better understand at a broader level, don't have the vested interest in doing so.
Yeah. You all weave an interesting tapestry, man, because I was listening to you earlier, Dr. Alexander, talk about a broader, and you too, Mike, the broader implications of what we see and the broader connections that exist within what we see in the media, the Supreme Court, these actors that have been exposed in January 6th. And as we transition to a discussion about Supreme Court decisions that have been recently rendered, especially this new gun law that they passed, man, it creates really a lawlessness nationally as it relates to guns and gun control. I've heard it asserted that decision itself is not unrelated to all that we see going on right now with the acceleration of aggression on the part of white supremacists around the country as they attack the quote unquote democratic processes that have, sustained whatever you want to call a representative democracy over the years. You're basically arming these people and telling them, hey man, go for what you know. It's nothing to stop you. It's open season, right? And the media, of course, as you pointed out, throughout this process, as we witnessed Donald Trump's representation of that worst side of humanity, try to minimize his behaviors, almost give it sports analogies from time to time. Oh, this is like a ball game. He's just playing, a certain way. No, when so much more is at stake for people, not just here in this country, but around the world, based on the things that go down here. It is interesting to note that people don't seem to have an awareness of how integrated all of these systems and actors are in the direction that they're clearly trying to move the country. And it comes down to, as you pointed out many times on this show, Mike, what is anybody on that team going to do about it? Ultimately, what are they going to do? So yeah, it's very interesting tapestry, man. The Supreme Court rendered a decision yesterday relative to gun laws in New York City that effectively puts a gun in the hands of every damn body, no matter what. You can get a gun, you can hide your gun, you can have your gun. The Supreme Court said so. In contravention of New York City's laws and many laws around the state. Some people have pointed out the irony of them saying that, this should be up to the states to make that decision when on Roe v. Wade, which they are about to overturn. They want to say it's not up to the states, very clearly, selectively pushing the agenda of conservative, evangelical white folks onto a majority of the country. And mind you, the people who put these people in place, man, were not elected by a popular vote. Democratic senators in the United States government represent 40 million more people than Republican senators in the United States government. But it was these Republican presidents, none of whom won a popular election, all of whom used the mechanism of the Electoral College, which itself is a vestige of white supremacist foundations in America, to appoint Supreme Court justices that don't reflect the will of the people and really run afoul of the law in many of their analysis. If you read them, Larry, you the attorney on her, and if Gerald was on her, I'm sure you all both are aware that if you read some of these opinions, many legal minds have effectively dissected them to the point where, man, this is just nonsense that you've written in service to an agenda that you were put here to fulfill. But I'd like to get your all's thoughts on the Supreme Court's recent movements and come back to the discussion later on in this about whether or not expansion of the Supreme Court is required at this point.
Well, okay, I'll take the old guy. I'll go first again.
All right.
I think that fundamentally, when you juxtapose, and I mentioned this before we started, when you juxtapose the Supreme Court decision to the staticness of the almost nothing that the United States Senate did in passing some tweaks to gun laws, the whole relationship is absurd. Okay, I mean, and it's this need of this fantasy to maintain the fantasy that the system is working, can work. Because if you accepted the fact that it's broken, then you got to do something about it. And fundamentally, Americans are not prepared to do anything about it. And what I would say, all of this grows out of, if you think of government, any governmental structure as an operating system for organizing and managing society, you cannot think of one operating system that was invented in 1787 that's in place today. I don't care what it is. I mean, given the whole evolution of science, technology, the world, culture, it's absurd to think that you're talking about 50 old white guys in Philadelphia in the summer of 1877, and they handed down something that you're still using. You didn't have indoor plumbing, you didn't have central heating, you didn't have hot and cold running water. You were damn near still using leeches and bleeding people to cure disease. So the whole notion that we're tied to somebody in 1787 and there's nothing you can do to change how you're governing yourself is absurd. Literally every modern democracy in Western Europe is in their fifth iteration. The French overthrew the monarchy 6 or 7 years after Americans created the United States as a republic. And I think they're in the 5th or 6th republic, as they refer to it. That's how many times they've changed their fundamental constitution over 200 years. But you can go to Germany, you can go every place on the planet that operates in any kind of democratic system, and their systems have evolved except this theocratic, superstitious nonsense that we got with founding fathers and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Americans are so actively ignorant that it impedes their ability to function in complex situations. And this is a complex situation for which, as a culture and collectively as a population, Americans are not capable of dealing with. And that's why you go ultimately see the collapse of the place.
What were your all's thoughts? Man, that was very well said. I was just really digesting what you laid out right there, and it makes perfect sense.
And on top of that, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
so this notion of expanding the court and all of these other, I guess, models for rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic are just futile. I mean, they're futile until there is something fundamentally done about the way we handle business and the intellectual ability of Americans, man. I mean, you're wasting time. So the issue is, yeah, I think we're in a society that has to collapse before they realize that is what needs to be done. They'd rather collapse than to change, holding on to some foolishness that it's never served the vast majority of us, and hasn't served the vast majority of them either. Vast majority of those folks that were storming the Capitol January the 6th are not descendants of folks that were landowners when that document was done. The vast majority of them. So, I mean, they're holding on to this folly, but the elites have done a very good job of selling whiteness and membership to the club, to which they cannot enter the front door.
The lost cause exists. And again, I think that is why we are so vulnerable. It's because it exists, and in order for, so there's a degree to which, in order for you to be a Black person who in theory would be in a position to combat this, you have to forego its existence. So in order for you to ascend, you got to say that this is over and has been over since at least the 60s, because of Dr. King made it better. And so once that occurs, our advocacy is cut off, at the knees, if not the ankles. It's a wrap. And so that's why we have to have these conversations. Free media, right? We're not funded by none of those interests, because we can bring a point of view that's not going to come otherwise. This is not a point of view that you're going to get from any kind of commercial, media outlet. Just the simple truth. I don't even know, I cannot remember hearing a Black member of Congress ever even mention the 3/5 compromise and the impact it has on, state representation. Like, so people talk, so you hear Black pundits talk about this cat in West Virginia, but we don't ever talk about how it becomes that these states, and I think Reddit mentioned, the difference in terms of, total representations, total population between, these Confederate states versus the rest. But nobody ever says that's how that came into be. They just keep saying, they do talk about the Electoral College, but they don't talk about it relative to the 3/5 compromise.
Right.
And so if we can't have fundamental dialogue about the historical accuracies and inaccuracies that exist that cause us to be where we are today, this is a failed proposition. And it is going to collapse, because we did see this before. I mean, that in the wake of the collapse, we saw a whole media and entertainment empire built upon the thought of the lost cause, starting with Birth of a Nation, all the way through Dukes of Hazzard. We got little kids running around talking about, I'm driving the General Lee. All of this is the same thing.
Yes, it's very interesting, man. Go ahead, Mike.
I would argue that the lost cause didn't lose. You could argue that if you look at the political culture trajectory of American society, the South lost the military engagement, but they didn't lose the war.
They didn't lose the war.
They won the war because they reshaped the society in
Yes.
their own image.
In their own image.
Right. And they had the support of the majority of white people in doing that. If we just take Donald Trump and the 2020 election, Biden got 85 million votes, but Trump got 75 million votes or whatever. And Trump got the majority of white votes. That Trump, this was not a racially integrated political fight where people of color and other marginalized communities were equally distributed on both sides. This was clearly the majority of people of color and what I would call what would kind of constituted the abolitionist white people against the more virulent racist white population and their indifferent white allies. Okay, because I don't consider the majority of white people in the virulent racist category, but I do think there's a large plurality of white people that are indifferent to injustice as long as it don't affect them.
As long as it don't affect them.
Yeah, and that's why you don't have change. And you got this smaller cohort of, I'll say, ethical, committed white people that have always been here. That's from the start of because the abolitionists, the Underground Railroad, they've always existed, but they've never been the critical mass big enough in the white community to change how white people operate in America. But they keep selling us and everybody this notion of American exceptionalism and how the country has made progress. And technologically, materially, the country has made progress. Politically, culturally, you could debate that, particularly from an ethical standpoint.
Let me throw
Mike
this in
Jones,
there.
I just wanted to add to that, in that, your use of or your introduction of the abolitionists into this conversation is that, again, we find ourselves duped because many of the abolitionists are also white supremacists.
Right.
And their fight against slavery was a fight, it was a fight about justice, right? But it was not a fight about the inherent equality of man.
And it was about what slavery did to them, what it meant out of the context of their Enlightenment principle. It had nothing to do with the efficacy of Black people.
Yes.
You
had folks who were funding and supporting Frederick Douglass until they found out he wasn't trying to leave. He's like, I'm gonna use these funds right here and now. It's like, no, well, brother, that's it. And so that becomes an issue. But that's how we see the Democratic Party. We see the Democratic Party as the historical abolitionist movement, as if they are with us, but really they against them. They're not really with us. They against them.
Right.
Let me throw this in here, Dr. Alexander. I want to get you all the way in on this, man. This is the perfect panel because I've been wanting to talk to anybody about it. But Mike, you laid out an equation relative to that last election, and I think it's very accurate in terms of who voted for who. 75 million for Donald Trump, 85 million for Joe Biden, and who was in those camps. Steve Bannon is Donald Trump's consigliere, man. He's his, he does his dirt. He's his operations man behind the scene. And he is on record talking about building out this movement. That's what he calls it on their side, this MAGA movement, Make America Great Again. We're coming for everybody. We're gonna pull everybody in. Next, we're gonna pull Black men into our group. He said by the time, in a couple of election cycles, we plan to have 50% of Black men voting with us. And when we get that locked in, it's a wrap. Add to that, if you've been following these January 6 hearings, the two sisters who were the election workers, or the sister that was the election poll worker down there in Georgia in Fulton County, who did her job, who then was approached at some point subsequent to that, in the midst of them trying to maneuver and manipulate that process. Kanye West's publicist, who is an attorney who was working with and on behalf of Trump and his supporters, goes down there and threatens the woman. Kanye West's attorney goes down there and threatens this woman. You need to admit that you fraudulently did this, X, Y, and Z, and give legitimacy to our claims, and maybe you'll be okay. As if your safety is in doubt if you don't get with the program. What are you all's thoughts, man, on the idea that brothers, acknowledging that both parties are not in our camp particularly, but what are your ideas on brothers buying into the white supremacist agenda?
I got this notion, and I really want to get you guys' reaction. I call it the fallacy of the politics of melanin.
Mm-hmm.
We're presuming ethnicity equates into political consciousness. So what has happened to us over the last 50 years is we bought into bourgeois capitalism too. When you all were little boys and I was a bigger boy, when we were growing up, Black protest movements were about economic and social equity. Our issues were housing, employment, education. You ain't heard a Black politician give a speech on those issues in 30 years, but we will talk about wealth creation, entrepreneurship, and all that. What we are is the petite bourgeoisie, if to use a classic Marxist term. And petite bourgeoisie just really want to be the real bourgeoisie and the super capitalist. So Jay-Z ain't us, okay? Jay-Z's interests are much more aligned with Elon Musk than they are Riddick Hudson, okay? I mean, if he got to choose, he gonna choose Elon Musk. He ain't choosing you, brother, okay? He got, they said that it's impossible. I forgot who said it, but it's impossible to get a man to do the right thing when his making a living depends on him doing
the wrong thing. Yeah.
Now that is the essence of it. And so until Black folks also get a class analysis of this structural situation, we won't be able to identify which one of us is us and which one of us is them. And that's it. And the fact that we get happy about everybody Black elevate, put it like this, whether LeBron James gets to own a basketball team or not should not be on the Black agenda, because it don't matter. It really don't. It ain't gonna change the life of nobody Black in America who's working class or low income, period. So if he does, I'm happy for the brother, hope he does, okay? But that can't be, we can't go to the mat for LeBron owning the team, because that don't make sense collectively. You gotta be utilitarian. What's the greatest good for the greatest number? And him owning the basketball team wouldn't qualify.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Alexander, I'm gonna come to you because you can help me. I agree with what you said, Mike, but I have heard and seen brothers who would not necessarily be in the same economic strata as a Jay-Z.
But they want to be.
Either. Right,
but they want to be.
Right, but I'm talking about brothers on the street talking that Trump talk, man, and X, Y, and Z. Donald Trump did this, did that. Dr. Alexander, what are your thoughts on the frame of mind that would allow someone who didn't have the means of some of our more moneyed brothers and sisters to align themselves with someone, or not just Trump himself, but a movement that is antithetical to their existence?
So I think this becomes, for us, I think this is, again, one of the complexities about, one of the complexities that exists because of the general indifference of the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party takes all of these varying interest groups, let's call it, but has no, beyond the vote, has no intention, no expressed intention in terms of building collaborative structures. And so what we have is a steady, this is another space where we see, intentional, misinformation. We see disinformation and we see misinformation directed at Black men for that reason, to create that splitting. And so we have sexism and we have misogyny and we have all of these things in which it becomes very normalized behavior for Black men to denigrate women and to see no value in the elevation of women, Black or otherwise, into any type of role of leadership. And so right now, you have X number. So like before, so when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump, I don't have enough fingers to count the number of people I know personally who said either they wouldn't vote at all or they were going to vote for Trump instead of voting for Hillary Clinton because a woman can't run this country. And so, and so that's informed by a number of isms that exist in this structure and that are perpetuated by these structures. And so, so you mentioned Kanye West. But this is the same as Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne with his anti-Black, anti-everything kind of lyrics. And then when it comes time to vote, he's one of those people who stands up in front of folks to be like, voting don't even matter. Right? And so we have this whole class of folks, you got Black folks and Black men in particular trying to relate to the Jay-Z's and the Lil Waynes and the Kanyes and all these other folks of the world, and Black women too, trying to relate to these folks, even like LeBron James, to Mike's point. Where he don't make us fool, and we act like it do, and we log on to these people as if somehow or another that's a part of our come up, and it ain't. And we're not doing what's necessary to take care of the least of these. And so even our so-called pastors are no longer involved with the least of these, because they too are seeking that same type of monetary gain, the prosperity ministry. That's all it is. And even, even when they're not talking directly about money, all they're talking about is, claiming.
Right.
As if somewhere in this thing, you ain't got to serve and take care of the least of these.
The prosperity ministry is a whole show unto itself, Dr. Alexander. I'm glad you said it. One day we'll come back to it.
But they all come from the same space, because a lot of why we can't look at these varying things also comes across the pulpit. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that is another great source of misinformation and disinformation in terms of what it is that we're fighting. And so it cannot be surprising to us that if we have a paternalistic society to start with, a misogynistic society to start with, a sexist society to start with, that, Black men would be vulnerable to, the less informed Black man would be vulnerable to the ideology of the aggressor, because that's what happens here. Some people call it, so So people, so this would be an example of all these things that we talk about.
What's
you
the
know,
syndrome where you start to identify
Stockholm.
with your
The
oppressor?
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I was going. And this would be one of those prime examples where we say this stuff all the time, but we don't really talk about the direct, application of it. Right.
Yeah.
And so this is what we see. This is the identification with the aggressor.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And they have a model that's tried and true, because you have a number of white folks who are actively going to jail against their interests, to be affiliated with what they perceive strength and a winner. And that's why the Hispanic community, Hispanic males, are at a disproportionate rate leaning towards that sort of dogma. So, I mean, it's the same thing. And the bottom line is, with these so-called elites that have been given money for being great examples of the help, that want to now imitate their oppressors by owning things. And I mean, this isn't new either. We had folks that the harshest slave owners in Mississippi were black slave owners. So I mean, none of this is new. We've seen all of this before. And Steve Bannon may not get 50%, but he's going to get close if we don't do anything. But because these folks you read it, you've seen it, I've seen it. We've all seen these, black folks that, want to affiliate themselves thinking that they're different than the average individual in our neighborhoods. And they go out and they bark and fire breathe this, MAGA dogma worse than, you just can't even engage them. So it's almost like they're under a trance. So, I mean, it's really a tough state of affairs.
Yeah. I want to transition. Looks to me, Larry, like we got a little over 15 minutes left. A couple of things we want to cover. One, for sure, this is disjointed from, maybe not, from other parts of our conversation, but we have a woman that's being held in Russia. Brittany Griner has been held now for 3 months, coming up, maybe 4. And there's been a limited response from our government that I'm aware of in terms of and public awareness. The public response has been muted at best. It is really a crime at this point that she is being held in the manner that she's being held. Also, looks like some old trumped up BS, marijuana essence in your backpack or whatever. And so this is worth, that's not even a damn misdemeanor over here. I don't think that's a taken under advisement, ordinance violation of some BS, man. And for her to be there now, I know you've wanted to put that front and center, and I wanted you to go ahead and weigh in on that, man, because it's an issue.
It's a major issue as far as I'm concerned. She's being held at least through the 1st of July now. And Russia has stated that they're going to trade her for this arms dealer that is being held in the United States. That's the bargaining chip that she is. And it doesn't appear to be, and I don't know, but from reports, but it doesn't appear to be as if the United States is giving support to Brittany to the extent that they should. Her wife has been quite critical this week of the United States and the United States Russian embassy. Their anniversary, Brittany and her wife's anniversary, was on Sunday. And they could not have a call directly, not because the Russians didn't do their part, but because of the missteps of the United States Embassy.
I saw that nobody answered the phone. She's calling and they had a time set up. Nobody answers the phone. Yeah.
They called 11 times from those reports. So, I mean, just this cavalier attitude, it reminds me of a Dave Chappelle stick. And I know he has his isms, but where he said, we typically aren't taking this hostage because we're bad bargaining chips. America's not coming to get us. And that is, and that's what what we had before. I mean, even her celebrity would not allow her to garner the attention that's warrant any human being, let alone
Right.
you know, an athlete abroad in the midst of this war. So I mean, it's just, you know, it's just another tale, a sign of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And at
listen.
another level, you get to see the impact of sexism and misogyny. Why are Black women? Why are female basketball players having to go to Russia to play to get economic parity, in search of economic parity? Why they can't just get paid? That's the whole reason why she's there. She's there because they don't get paid, and that is a problem here, right? But we don't see these things as, you know, as a singular problem. And many of us don't even see it as a problem. Many of us don't even care. And when we got all of these other entities that the United States subsidizes, but you know, so if you tell me that this is an issue because the WNBA can't get the appropriate commercial sponsorship, then why can't the United States subsidize women's basketball so that there could be economic parity for those women? And then so somebody will say, well, they can't do that. That's a whole bunch of foolishness. When in reality, the United States subsidizes businesses all the time. So why not subsidize that so that these women don't have to go overseas in the off season,
Right.
trying to make the money.
Right. It's ironic, Doc. The U.S. soccer team, to your point, the U.S. women's soccer team just won a decision to get economic parity with the men's soccer team when they have been 1,000 times better than the men's soccer team for 45 years.
Those, right,
You just no comparison at all, man.
I don't even know the last time that the men's team was
Qualified for anything. They don't.
Yes.
They never get out of the regional.
Yes.
Bro. They don't.
The
World Cup.
The only other discrepancy as big as women's tennis versus men's.
I was going to
tennis.
say, and the same with women's tennis.
I mean, it's the only other one. I mean, it's foolishness, man. It's foolishness.
Yeah. Wanted to come back locally, man, in these last 10 minutes of the show. We have some developments here, Larry and Dr. Alexander and Mike, relative to the Board of Aldermen. There's going to be a special election. I think it matters, you know, given the recent revelations of how that body can impact business and decisions in the city. Lewis Reed, John Collins Muhammad, Jeffrey Boyd, all indicted and gone. Left a vacancy at the top. Lewis Reed was the president of the Board of Aldermen, and there's going to be a special election to fill his position until the general election for that position comes next November 2023. Want to get your all's thoughts on what that process looks like and the kind of person we want to see in that position, if it matters at all.
Just a correction. This election will be for the remainder of the unexpired term, which
Right.
is April of 2023.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So there'll be the seat will be back open. I mean, there'll be another election April 2023.
Okay.
I think this is an interesting time for the city and the Board of Aldermen specifically, because in 2023, April 2023, the Board of Aldermen goes from 28 to 14. So it's a complete reshuffling. You'll end up with a whole different dynamic, whole different board, completely different political geography. So the real question is, does Black political leadership have a plan going forward, okay, to deal with St. Louis post-April 2023? And this period is really just a speed bump on the way to, that date with destiny, so to speak. But the real issue is what happens after April 2023, as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think, Mike, coming back to you, that the person who wins this special election, this runoff, has any advantages going into the April election, momentum wise?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I obviously it's like having home court advantage don't assure you the championship, but if it gets to game 7, you'd rather be probably playing it at home than playing it on the road. So
Yeah.
I would look at whoever wins this having home, I presume will be the candidate in April, and I would argue they would have a leg up.
Yeah, I know Megan Green is one of the candidates. I can't remember the name of the other candidate. And Mike, you raised an interesting point about what is Black political leadership on the Board of Aldermen doing right now. And I had to think to myself, man, you know, who are the Black remaining alder persons on it? Sharon Tyus, I know, but I can't think of another one right now. Terry Kennedy is retired. He's the clerk for the board, but he's not on the board. Who else?
Well,
who's left?
When I'm referring to Black political leadership, there's the Black leadership at the Board of Aldermen level. And I'm old enough to remember when there was Black political infrastructure. And what you were talking about is political organization and what they would have done would have mattered in a race. Okay. And we obviously don't have that anymore. So we got this huge vacuum that gets filled by what I call these entrepreneurial political players who just can show up and put themselves. It's like inviting yourself to the tournament or the PGA without any qualifying criteria. You just showed up, put down the entry fee, and now you're in the race. And the vetting process that used to happen, that when you was younger doing this, you wasn't a fan of. But the reality was you had to get through some stuff. I put it like this: we all are members of Black Greek organization, and I think we would all say there's a difference between pledging a frat and writing a check to join. Okay, and that's not disparaging anybody,
the grad bros, right?
But it's just a different process, and it'll produce a different kind of brother at the end of the day. What process you go through or don't go through. Politics, I would argue, is the same way.
Larry, I know you've been paying attention to that situation over there, man. What are some of your insights relative to what we might see happening?
Just the critical loss of supposed leadership. I mean, the number of individuals that put faith in these 3 individuals that have been indicted, rightly or wrongly, have just been betrayed, and that vacuum. So I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because if in fact you were on the take like this, the question becomes, how effective were you for your constituents anyway? So if you weren't effective, good riddance. But the bottom line is, they have created a chasm that should not have occurred. And I have nothing nice to say about them at this point.
I appreciate that, Larry, because, and this is, again, something that Mike Jones always refers to, but, so we confuse, we think that they are good for us because they're Black and are in leadership positions, but that don't mean they're Black leaders, right? So we think because they're there at all, that somehow or another that accrues to us. And to Larry's point, I'm not sure that you could be one and the same, a good Black leader and be on the take. And so, I mean, we just had to be more thoughtful about, how, what we are seeking. What is it that we want, these people that we vote for to to represent us and to help us to achieve and to attain whatever it is that we think that is. But it can't be that every time, you know, we choose because, you know, he or she looks like us, and then when they get caught with their hand in the cookie jar, our only response is white folks do this all the time. We don't change our political thinking or voting practices based on this behavior. Our default is white folks do this all the time. If he was white, they wouldn't have said nothing. This is what we do, and this is how we approach this.
What's discouraging even
really,
more about it? Go ahead, Mike.
Now, I was just gonna say, here's the one question, here's a variation of the one question that I think Black voters ought to ask all Black candidates. Tell me the last book you read and why it was important and how it influenced you. Or tell me what's the book or author that you've read that has had the biggest influence on your political philosophy and how you see government and the role of politics. If they start stuttering at that point, cut them. Okay, that literally my position is I haven't used a sports metaphor in a long time, analogy in a long time, but you can't play the game if you can't think the game. There ain't enough physical talent to compensate for intellectual incompetence. And we don't ask those deeper questions that tells me, not that I agree with you, but that you think the game, which means you got a chance to be successful, and maybe we can figure out how to play together. But if you literally don't understand any of this, there's nothing you gonna get done. And if I'm looking at it as a voter and think of myself as a coach, ain't nothing I can do with you. Okay, you are absolutely no value to my team. I don't care what you think you can do, you can't play because you're not smart enough. We talk about basketball IQ, your political IQ is not up to where it needs to be on this team, to be on the floor with us. That's how we need to look at it. And that question right there will solve every problem. It just like, let's run a couple of drills and I can tell you who can play and who can't.
Right, a couple of drills.
Right, a couple of drills. And the answer, pose that question either way. The last book, the book you read that's been most influential, or the book that you read that has become that most influenced how you see government and all that kind of politics and all that kind of stuff. And if somebody can't tell you that, that means they ain't never read one.
Hey, Mike, we're at the end of our hour. On behalf of Mike Jones, Dr. Charles Alexander, Larry Fields, I'm Reddit Hudson. Thank you for joining us here on The Level Set. We'll see you again next week. Everybody have a great week, man.